comics are stupid.
No Harry Potter movie is good.
And you're like, give me the Snyder Cut.
Oh, sorry, just walk in front of you here. I'm gonna put my popcorn down. Oh, sorry, gotta put this here.
Universal needs to sue Sony.
Hey, I'm an idiot. I was fired from Fox. Let me go.
I'd like actually to see Venom just crush Spider-Man.
When kids shows were considered Peppa Pig, an adult show considered Adult Swim, and American Dad. One show would combine the kid aspect of the kid show and the adult aspects of the adult shows to create the Avatar.
Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is what I'm going to be doing a retrospective / review on. I think a retrospective is a better word because unlike a review, this will be kind of looking at it in its context of its time, even though I hadn't seen it before. So unlike the Phineas and Ferb retrospective, which I talked about before, which I had as the first episode, I'm going to be talking about Avatar, which I've watched really for the first time in the last 4 days. And so I'm going to talk about it in terms of, what I thought of it and how it holds up today. And so, yeah, let's just get right into, I guess, the show. So, Avatar: The Last Airbender is a phenomenal show. This was not only a show that was, revolutionary at its time, not only introducing anime into the main American cartoons, but it also dealt with a bunch of different cultures, based on the elements such as the South Asian, Inuit, and East Asian cultures. And it also had messages and stories, and it also was the kind of evolution of a lot of things which now use a lot of things it talked about. It was also a way to show and to use things like, what were they? Like the concepts like genocide, war, imperialism, totalitarianism in a kid's show. And I think this is something which was revelatory at the time and still is today. And I think it's something which, the fact that this is all able to be put into a show is insane. And I think that this idea about, these philosophical questions the show talks about are still really relevant to today and, really hold up. And the animation style definitely holds up even to today. I think that, this show is just fantastic. And I'm going to talk about specific problems, because I did have problems with the show before I go into specific good things about the characters and about the story. And so the biggest problem, which I think is not something which a lot of shows are immune from. Well, there's two aspects to this problem. The first one is some of the episodes, especially before the big conclusion ones. For example, right before the last 4 episodes, that kind of movie episode, which was released as a movie at the time, and now is kind of being split into 4 episodes, 4 parts. And there were filler episodes, essentially, right? Where they would have these episodes, you look at the one right before the 4-part episode, which I was talking about, which was the theater where they recapped everything that had happened. Or you look before that, before the Black Sun episode, where they had the Dreams and Nightmares episode, another example of a filler episode. Right before they would go into the big action, they'd have that kind of honestly unnecessary episode, where they would just kind of do something, which, it does provide depth to the characters, but it's also not the most necessary thing in the world for the story. And I think it was just there to kind of meet their episode quota. And I think that was something which I'd had a problem with. But I mean, other than that, it was a very good show, right? In its entirety. And I felt like the story was very well done. So I don't think that really took away from the overall story, but it was something which I think, a lot of shows, especially nowadays, you look at shows that they're doing a lot more of these shorter series, and they're not worried about specific episode quotas. And I mean, there's this new kind of, even for the full series shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which had actually managed to avoid fillers by doing multiple stories, because when you do one whole story for 24 episodes, or 24, 20 to 24 episodes, you get points where there isn't anything else to tell, and you have to kind of stretch that out, and I think that can cause problems, and it still does cause problems for shows. Now, the other thing, unlike most cable shows today, this show is able to give you the proper character development, but only with 24 episode shows instead of, hour long. Like you look at the more kind of complex, or the things that people consider more complex shows. A lot of them nowadays are of course, 40 minutes and to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. So I think the fact that they were able to do that as well was very good. Also, they didn't feel like it needed to run for so long, That was the other aspect, right? It kind of just ended at the end. When the story was over, it was done. They didn't feel like they needed to keep going for 7, 8 seasons, even though it was a very popular show, and it's not like, it would have not like the viewership would have fallen off necessarily if they decided to continue going, but they decided this was the story they wanted to tell, and they ended it after they finished telling it, which I think is something which a lot of studios find trouble doing when something's making money. Just ending the story at the end of the story you want to tell. Which is why they're trying to go for the most. You've got the CW shows which go for 200 seasons. You've got Game of Thrones, which I guess just trying to tell a story, wanted to tell and then ending. But you know what I mean. In regards to shows kind of doing that. Now and I want to talk about the characters, and now I don't know if this will appear on the screen, and this is kind of, and I don't know, maybe there'll be an altered version, that'll be Future Me's problem. But what I'm going to talk about now in terms of how I'm going to talk about the character aspect of the show is I'm going to talk about it in terms of this tier list I've made, and it's on the screen now. I don't know, maybe it'll be an updated version of a tier list if I kind of, as I go through it, kind of decide to move people, because I had kind of thought about moving people while watching the finale, because the finale actually had a bunch of people where I kind of like that person moves up a tier. So I'm going to start with the first person, which is Aang, and I'm going to talk about him because he's the main character, obviously, of the story, and I think the majority of this kind of talking about him will be because he's obviously in the S tier. I think Aang is someone who, obviously, just by the nature of the fact that he's the title character, will be in the S tier of this kind of show, and I think his impact on the show, and him and Katara, actually, I think both kind of can be talked about in terms of this, but this was really their story from the beginning. And I think they also were characters who, besides one episode in the entire show, were very strong and very much the focal point. And I think that even if they weren't on the screen, they were still there as the focal point of the show, and their stories were their stories, which were intertwined, actually were kind of the biggest part. They're also the most emotionally complex characters I found, because the other thing about the show is they kind of have the role setting, but I think that those two characters were the only ones whose roles really stood out. If you want a good example, right, and one of the reasons why Soca isn't up here, and instead it's in this S tier is because, you think Harry Potter, right? You think Ron, Hermione, and Harry. I think this is the best way to put it. So Harry and Hermione are the two best characters there, and Ron is the comic relief. So it's the same way that Soca is down there instead of in the A tier instead of the S tier, because I think his story was not complex. Now, you may be wondering why. Appa is in the S tier. You'd be like, well, animal sidekick, right? Well, how could they be in the S tier? Well, it's because of what actually was done with this sidekick character, this animal sidekick character, right? Because most times when you have an animal sidekick character who can't talk, they kind of end up just being that, an animal sidekick character that can't talk. Now, I'm not obviously going to disclude any animal sidekick characters who can't talk, because that obviously gives them a personality. You look at Mushu the Dragon and Mulan, for example, right? But when you have a character who has literal stories and has a whole character arc, even though they can't talk, and they can actually focus stories around this character, and they can make you feel for this character, and make this character kind of, you understand this character, even if they can't talk, I think is very good. And there's one episode in particular, I think it was the swamp episode. I don't remember exactly which episode it is, and I apologize for that, but it was the swamp episode. In that episode, you got that story, right, that side story, I guess, with Appa and Momo actually running away from the people trying to eat them. And I think that, one of that kind of episode, you also got the Lost Days of Appa, where he was kind of showing what happened after he got kidnapped. I think those episodes, you actually were able to follow him as you would Aang or Katara or any of those guys. And so I think that was something which was really well done. Now, someone else who I would actually move from the A tier to the S tier now, upon finishing the show, is actually Aira. And the reason I would move him is because I think his story ended so well that, and I think he was always right on that edge of the A and the S tier. But he'd kind of be in that middle tier, right, between A and S, because I don't think he had enough of a story to be able to be, right up there with Aang, Katara, and Appa. But I think he had such a good story, and especially the good ending, that he's almost right there. And maybe and I mean, there is that argument to be made that he should be in the S tier. But, you know, for now, I'm going to leave him in the A tier. Because I think, again, his story, right? You know, where you talk about him going from this aspect of, you know, kind of this taste, like, you know, this Fire Nation normal, all the way to being kind of a good guy and then kind of a savior, and kind of, you know, along the way saving him. And again, someone who is given complex stories and who is able to have episodes focused on him and focused on, you know, his adventures, and for people not to be bored and for it to still be interesting, right? And I think the same thing can actually be said for Zuko, because Zuko, again, was someone who, and I think was really redeemed in terms of being an interesting character to follow right at the very end. And that was where you really enjoyed following him, right when he joined them. I think before that, it was kind of like, yeah, he's good, but then, you know, especially in Ba Sing Se, some of those episodes, you would kind of get a little bit bored watching his story play out, because you're not rooting for him, not until the end, at least, of that. I think the other character who is in this A tier, and I don't think I'm going to go through all the tiers, I'm just going to kind of point out notable ones after I finish A, is Momo, because Momo, another character very similar to Appa, except to a lesser extent, was someone who was really able to be given stories and was able to really go through those stories and kind of, you know, show how, you know, how much, like, how you can follow this character, right? And in the story, the episode before the last days, or the lost days of Appa, when you were looking at those kind of, you know, various adventures of the characters in Ba Sing Se, I think that Momo had his own kind of little adventure, and it was arguably one of the more interesting adventures, in where he was trying to find Appa, and he was trying to figure out where he went, and he kept thinking, you know, and I think that relationship also was something which made a lot of was very interesting, right? And you saw that relationship another bunch of times, and there's an earlier episode where they were kind of together and you kind of got to see their friendship. I don't remember exactly when it was, but there was another episode which was a very good example of this, which is not coming to me right now. And the other character up here, obviously, who I've kind of talked about already in terms of why he's not in the S tier, but instead just in the A tier, is Soca. Now, Soca is someone who is, you know, very much the comic relief of the group, but also having still having that ability to have a complex story, right? Because although sometimes, you know, his story would boil down to a love interest or to his father. And I think that was the other aspect, was his story didn't have much to it. Typically, there wouldn't be anything complex with his story. It'd be very one-dimensional, which I found sometimes to be a bit irritating, you know. It'd be, and I think honor being one of the bigger kind of things in this show, in terms of destiny and honor, which I talked about in terms of how the show answers philosophical questions like that and kind of poses them as well. But I think, you know, his story, and I think even to an extent, up until the end, really, Zuko's story was really kind of very flat and very much the same. And so I thought that was something which I couldn't actually, you know, fully get behind. Now, the character in the B tier, who I really want to talk about first, is Azula. Now, Azula, who looks a lot like Kitty Pryde from X-Men Evolution, but, you know, we'll leave that there. I'm sure there's the comparison picture I have on the screen. But Azula was another character who I wanted to talk about, because Azula was someone who, you know, throughout the course of the show really showed to be this kind of classic evil villain, which you got a lot, especially after that show. You know, when it comes to other shows that kind of came out and kind of did this, and also there were a lot of Star Wars moments I'd like to point out quickly, in this show as well. You know, you've got the Aang, the Sand People, who are very much like the Sand People, and you've got you know, from episode 2, the whole Anakin arc with Aang and the people, the Sand People, right? I'm just gonna call them the Sand People because I don't know what to call them, in the desert after the Owl episode, the Owl Library episode. And I think and then you kind of got Katara and the other people. You know, you got a lot of that kind of raw emotion episodes, you know, where people just kind of pointing out their raw emotion and killing people. The bloodbending is something I will talk about for sure in a minute, but yeah. So Azula was someone else who I kind of thought was a very good character in that way. And now the other character, so she was good, she was bad, good at being bad, but there wasn't much else to her character. Right? Like, unlike someone like a Zuko, you didn't feel any sympathy for her, which worked as she was the villain, but I think that also kind of took away from any sort of complexity to her character, because she was just happy to be bad. Yes, toward the end, I know she was kind of unraveling as a person, and she was kind of going crazy, but again, she was still bad. There was no way to she was the bad guy. And I think that's even something which Fire Lord Azula, which is why he's in the C tier, or Ozai, Fire Lord Ozai, and why he's in the C tier is because, again, someone who you don't see a lot of, but did have an impact, and when was there was impactful. And I think the thing that really makes sure that he stays in the C tier rather than dropping to the D tier with some other characters was because he was someone who actually had those episodes where they showed the childhood with Avatar Roku, and you got to actually see the impact that of his childhood. And so I think that was something which was really good, and which helped him stay in the C tier rather than falling to the D tier where I think he would have otherwise. And now the other character who I put in the B tier, who I want to talk about, is probably who do I want to talk? Jet. Actually, I'm going to talk about Jet first. Now, Jet. The reason I'm going to talk about Jet is because I think that I feel like Jet is someone who I didn't like his story very much. I didn't find his story very appealing, and so that's why I kind of I kind of let him go kind of lower because I didn't find his story very interesting, and I didn't find his story interesting. I felt like it was an unnecessary story. It made sense for that first episode, but then when they brought him back, again, it wasn't something which I enjoyed. I know that he was there to be the example for the Earth story, but I don't know. I feel like his story was just unnecessary, which is why I kind of left him in the D tier. The other character who I wanted to talk about, probably in terms of their tiering, is who would it be? May? Maybe I'll talk about May, and I'll talk about the other one, the princess, Moon Princess person together, because they're both there for the same reason. And you can maybe even make the argument of, you could Ty Lee being there for the same reason as well, and that reason is they were kind of just that female character, either to be a love interest or to be, where did I put Zuko? Actually, that's a good question. Zuko was a tier above ? Yes. And now the reason I did that was because Zuko had more to her story, but on the other hand, May, Ty Lee, besides being the sidekicks of the bad guy and then being love, and then for at least May being the love interest, they didn't have much else going for them. And so I think that was something which really made it more difficult for just made it more difficult to really put them higher up in that tier list. Avatar Roku had some good moments, and so that's why I put him in the B tier. Now, when it comes to the other controversial tiering, I think, in my opinion, is a controversial tiering, is probably Toph being in the B tier as opposed to either the A or S tier. Now, the reason for this, I think, would probably be because of the lack. There was one moment of progression of her character, and that was it. Her character wasn't really there to progress and kind of move forward, and so I think that it kind of, toward the end, she kind of just became this consistent character. She didn't really evolve. I don't feel she evolved that much, and so I kind of left her kind of in that B tier, where she is, because besides that moment from, being the wrestler and the rock earth fighter to being the teacher, and kind of that there was that one episode really, or 2 episode progression of her. I feel like other than that, she was kind of sidelined in terms of progression, and she also came around later. So I think it was harder because she came around, after that the initial character was being established. So it was harder to kind of sympathize with her in terms of putting her higher. Now, I think in the same sense that I had, kind of Ty Lee and the Moon Princess, and I put Suki in the B tier, and the reason for that is because I feel like she is someone who, although she had more of a story than some of them, she was still kind of there to be that generic love interest character, and she also didn't get enough, I think, time. And I think it would be actually interesting if they kind of went back and they did the story on those warriors, because they would be very not even back, but in terms of them going forward, because now of course they've got Ty Lee as their part of their group. So I think that would be interesting. Long Fang is somewhere on this list. I don't remember where I put him. I think he might be in the C tier. I would assume he's in the C tier because that's probably where I would put him, unless he's not even on this. But if he is, then he'd be in the C or D tier, because I feel like, again, in terms of the development of the character, you didn't really see it. I don't know why I can't see where I put him. But yeah, that's kind of what I didn't feel like there was much to him. A lot of these smaller characters I kind of spread out at the bottom because I felt like there wasn't much to talk about in terms of them and in terms of their impact. You had the Earth King who kind of was there. You had the Viper Lady, because she looks like Viper from the Marvel, and you've got the eyeball head guy, and then you got all these characters who are kind of like just there. You got the water teacher. You've got the bloodbending. Oh, yeah, bloodbending. Let's talk about that now. I think this story also brought up a lot of cool mythical aspects, and I just realized that this is a 20-minute video, so it's 4 seasons of a show, so can I give it a pass for that? I don't know. So yeah, I think the bloodbending aspect was also very cool, just in terms of what it means for the whole show, and I thought that was just very well done. But yeah, honestly, I did really enjoy the show. There is a reason why. Like, it wasn't like I planned on watching it all so quickly, but I did because it was just so good and I just couldn't stop. And the fact that that's true and it holds up, and it holds up not only for kids but for everybody, I think it really does cement its place in history, because it does hold up still today. It's not like it was one of those shows which was good but it's kind of aged badly. Like, this show hasn't aged badly at all. If anything, it's probably aged better than when it initially came out, because things are even more relatable. A lot of these lessons which were taught in the show and kind of explained in the show are very useful, especially in today's society. And honestly, I love it. I love the show completely, and I'm just surprised it took me so long to watch it, but I'm happy I did. And so that's really the retrospective / review of the show. It's a 23-minute video now, so I don't know if you like that or not. If you liked it, let me know down below. And if you liked the show, let me know down below. What did you think of the show, and what would you change in my tier list if you could, in terms of what your own tierings? Like, who would you put in the S tier? I know there's a lot of people who would put people like Zuko in the S tier, would put people like Ira in the S tier, would put people like Toph in the S tier, Azula in the S tier, and Soca in the S tier. So let me know what you think down below. Where would you put certain people? Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts, follow us on social media and Twitter, comicboys_. I think that's what it is. Still, yeah. So, and it's all in the bottom of the screen, actually, which I could start saying now because I know it's there for sure. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.